Sloppy Spoilers with your host, DT2. What's up, y'all? DT2 Comics Chat here. Great to be back doing Sloppy Spoilers again. Tonight, we're going to talk about Shogun Episode 1. And holy cow, what a tangled web we weave. Let me bring on my co-host, David Nemesis Howard.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? So glad to be back on Sloppy Spoilers. So glad to have this man back. He had some health issues. I think it's okay to say that, but you are good to go now, and it's good to see your face. So welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I am looking forward to this. This is a series that I've been looking forward to. I am a huge Shogun fan. I have read the book, God, I'd have to say at least 15 times. I own the miniseries, watched it numerous times. I love this. It's going to be interesting to talk about this because there's a lot of things to talk about, and I'm sure we're going to hit them. So really looking forward to it.
Cool. Welcome to Steve Shadewing Sellers. What's up, Steve?
Well, glad to get back into it. I'm getting set up in a new place for right now, and I'm looking forward to discussing this. Shogun is something that I really am not as familiar with as Nem. I've watched the miniseries, but it was like decades ago, and I don't remember very much beyond like a couple of things that were funny. I do, however, have a decent amount of knowledge of Japanese culture. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I know enough to get by. So it should be interesting to get into this.
All right. Well, jumping into it, I have to say I do feel like you need to read the book or have seen the previous series, and you need to study this period in Japan's history to kind of get the full context of what's going on. I was able to kind of get some broad strokes going in terms of understanding generally what was happening. Overall, the episode felt to me rather slow because it's a setting of the stage, but I guess I'm used to a different kind of pacing because most shows would spend 15 or 20 minutes doing that, and then they move to something that's a little bit more action oriented or whatever. But this was felt like very slow and drawn out, and so I understand that. So it has to be one of those series where you're going to have to watch some episodes to really get in it. What I will say off the bat that I really enjoyed was I thought it was shot beautifully. I thought the cinematography looked really good. There was nothing that jumped out at me that felt inauthentic. And even though the color palette might have been this close to being slightly washed out, it wasn't all the way in there. So I really like that. It speaks to how there are always the same things, because I tell my students all the time, the human race fights about the same things in every generation. There aren't really any new fights. We just keep fighting the same fight with different players. And so I can see that here. I'm also always moved by the strong system of honor and the strong code of honor. But just like anything else, sometimes the dogma can lead you to extremes. And what I find fascinating between cultures is how people deal with that. Because I've discovered people think that life is about rules. And so people you have to have rules to have order, but people keep thinking that it's adherence to rules that will solve their problems. And then life will always serve you up a situation that creates a moral and emotional dilemma where you have to choose between your rules and your heart. And that is what resonated to me the most out of this episode, because it was obvious to me with, I forgot the character's name, who jumped the gun and embarrassed his lord and then said he had to end his bloodline because he stepped out of line. And then everybody that's impacting was like, now we all got to die because you messed up. And, now we all basically, have to bite the bullet. And it was always also interesting to me. It's more fun to me when you see weaponry that's not just guns of any kind, because guns are a little bit easier when you actually have to fight and have some kind of skill. And when a man draws a sword, you know that playtime is over. I really like that. So there was a lot I liked, but a lot, unfortunately, that was lost because I just need some more background. Let me throw it over to Steve, and then we'll go to Nims, and let's give some first impressions from this episode.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this was a slow burn episode. They're trying to set the stage, and there's a lot of exposition that they have to get across because a lot of people, particularly Western audiences, are not going to get most of the history. They're just not. And because of that, they have to establish that. They have to establish the political climate. They have to establish the characters in the story, and a lot of names that a lot of people aren't going to remember in Western culture. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that has to be done. I will say I do agree that this is an impressively shot show. I mean, very cinematic in quality. It comes across. It really kind of looks like what you'd see in a Kurosawa film if it were colorized. It has that sort of look. And yet, I really am impressed by the fact that this is a Western production. Using Japanese actors and some of that was on Sonata that was the condition he agreed to when he took the role of I want to say Toranaga, is that he wanted all of these people that are in there to be a Japanese production. He wanted everything as much as possible to be true to his culture, and I respect that. It comes across, no question, it comes across, and I will say that. It is very historically authentic. They did a lot of work to make it authentic looking. It does look like it's a snapshot of that era, the snapshot of, 17th century Japan, crossed over with pirates and, Western traders and, the Catholic Protestant feud and, that was going on. And it just feels like it was a shot of that time, and it looks like it could believably have happened. So I think everybody did a reasonable job of that. I mean, it's not perfect, but I think it did pretty well.
What's also interesting to me is, and I was just talking to somebody about this, about how faith is always viewed through the eyes of culture. And sometimes people don't know how to separate the two. They don't know how to separate spirituality from culture. And so your view of faith and whatever your faith is has to be filtered through that. And I thought that was quite powerful. But it seemed to me that, as always, everybody defined their version of their faith according to what best suited their interests, which always makes me laugh.
Yeah.
Especially when people say they have the same kind of faith, but we got to filter it through making sure that we get what we want or we can do what we need to do, in these situations. So that kind of jumped out at me too. So Nims, thoughts on the first episode?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of what you said as far as it being slow. I think part of that is because, the original miniseries was like 6 hours long, and this is actually 10 episodes, and it's going to be over 10 and a half hours or more, long. So, I mean, they've tacked stuff in, they've added some stuff in. I thought it was an interesting choice that they have stayed with the Japanese actors speaking Japanese. They haven't switched over to English. I don't know that they're going to, which is going to be interesting because eventually, I don't think this is going to give anything away to anybody. Blackthorn is going to learn to speak Japanese. So are we going to see this actor speak Japanese? I don't know. We'll see, because they've already had some other Western actors attempt Japanese, rather badly, but, they've attempted it. Which was true to the story. From a historical perspective, I'll say that this whole scenario actually happened. It's historical. I mean, the Portuguese were there with the Jesuits. The Japanese had no idea there was another brand of Christianity, and eventually the whole Protestant Catholic king came to their shores, and they wanted no part of it. The one thing I do find a little frustrating, because it's frustrating because a lot of people won't understand it. My wife watched it with me. She didn't get it. Is that there's no narrator or some way to explain to people stuff that's going on. So at one point in this first episode, someone, fief is increased to like 300 koku or something like that. What you don't know is that koku is not money. Samurai were paid in rice. To take money for doing something was dishonorable, which is why being a pirate is such a bad thing, because if you fight for money, you're lower than low. And that is a huge thing that you got to grasp, and there's no explanation for that. And that's kind of one of my, if I would say, critiques of this first episode would be that, is that there are a lot of concepts that Western audiences need to understand that you're not going to understand if you haven't read the book or you don't intimately know Japanese culture. So
why do they feel like Blackthorn is so important? Because they took a whole bunch of crap from him that I didn't expect him to take.
Well, I don't I don't want to spoil anything, but they did mention this first episode that Toranaga is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, so he controls trade between the Westerners and the and other parts. Well, a big part of trade, and this is historical, and it's in the book, was that they went to China for stuff, but China and Japan don't get on well, so they relied on the Jesuits to do that and the Portuguese. But Toranaga's in the way. Toranaga doesn't like that. And so Toranaga's at odds with the Westerners, and now Toranaga may have found a weapon to use against the other Westerners. So,
oh, okay, that was
also keep in mind that the Westerners also have guns.
Yes, and cannon, and yeah.
Right. Now, I did catch that part about them saying if you control a ship like that, you've got those armament increases as well as the silver and gold, so I did catch that, but I just wasn't sure why, because from the beginning Blackthorn is just an idiot, and he's obviously an idiot. Like, why are you putting up with this guy?
One of the things that, without going into too much of the history, one of the things that's interesting at this time is that samurai considered being involved in finances or running their house's finances as dishonorable. In fact, the person who ran all the finances in a kingdom was usually their wife, because to be involved with something like that was not manly. And so they weren't traders, but they needed things from China, specifically silk for kimonos and things like that, but other stuff. And so they relied on either, before the Westerners came, they relied on basically bandits and stuff like that to trade with China, or commoners. And then once the Westerners came in, they could do it much better and faster. And they had the force to back up, their trade demands with, to Macau. So you keep hearing the reference Macau. That's huge. So, yeah.
Well, that's another thing I find interesting in general, but specifically about this episode, was how, based on what you're saying about how gender roles were driving a lot of different things that they did, and how that seems to be one of the things that I don't know, drives people kind of crazy. I don't know if that's faith-based, or I don't know if that's just a human thing, but people seem to have unyielding drive to define what a gender role is, and if you are or are not their version of a man or a woman. And people will hurt themselves and go to extremes to try to prove their manhood or their womanhood or whatever. And that's another thing that I find fascinating, because it's so different from culture to culture. And so finding what we find here, I was like, I thought all the men was going to be dead before this first episode, because everybody put their foot in their mouth at some point. I'm like, oh, somebody else going to lose their head, because you can't do that. I do know that one of the major differences between the Japanese in particular and Western culture, Western thinking, if you will, is that we are raised on the rights of the individual. But Japanese people think more of a we or a group mindset. They're more of a homogenous group of people, physically and in terms of their mindset. Pretty much, if it happens to one Japanese, it happens to all. And that's very, very different from the way we think in the West. And still to this day, or at least the last time I was there, honor and respect is very, very important, and not embarrassing the family, and being sure you carry yourself with a high amount of decorum those principles have still come through, and that's very, very different from kind of how we do it. And
I will say later in the story, that theme you're talking about is going to rear its ugly head over and over and over again. So the collective, it's an interesting examination. Now, one of the things I saw in this that was interesting is that they cut out some major parts and then brought in some stuff that was happened in the storyline but wasn't in the book. So specifically, the captain general of the ship, he makes it to land and ends up rotting to death down in that pit that they were in. And you see at one point, you know how they went down in that pit, the samurai went down there to get him, and one guy got caught down there and stayed down there. That's a big thing because that guy disgraced his lord by getting caught, and he's left down there to rot. And then eventually the Lord takes pity on him and lets him escape the pit by killing himself down there. So, and that's not in this episode at all. But meanwhile, they brought in Fujiko and her husband, you know, and then the killing of the baby. None of that takes place in the book. It's in the storyline, but it happened years before. So,
let's see. All right, Steve, I want you to give us a little background on Japan at this time.
I don't know a whole lot, but I will say that I was doing a little bit of research. This is after what's called the Sengoku period, where there was like a period of 140 years or so of civil war, which ultimately ended with Ieyasu basically taking over Japan and unifying everything. And that's the guy who was the Taiko in the beginning, who ends up dying, and his son is the heir. So what they're trying to do,
Tokugawa is the Toranaga figure here. The Taiko was before, and he was the military dictator, which is
yeah. So this is like a rare instance of peace, of hard-won peace that they're trying to hold on to with the five lords that are trying to share power. But really, in practice, what it is like four wolves and a sheep deciding who's for dinner, and the sheep is basically the Sonata character.
Yeah, and Tokugawa or Toranaga fought against the Taiko until what they don't show you here. It's in the history in the book is that Toranaga. Yoshida was always on the side of Taiko. Toranaga fought against him along with his bannermen. And then when it became obvious to him that the Taiko was going to win, he switched sides and betrayed his lord. So, yeah.
Which you only get away with if you win. Otherwise, you get your head cut off.
Yeah. Why did the Lord boil that man alive?
Do you want the short answer? Because he's sick and twisted.
Okay.
Yabu is.
Okay.
I would say
sick and twisted. It also explains the other scene to me now. Okay.
In the book, if there's one character that epitomizes everything bad or excess of Japanese culture, it's Yabu.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, because part of the problem is like essentially if you were a noble, you could treat anybody who wasn't a noble pretty much however you want, and it's your right as a lord. And this guy abused it basically.
And I don't know if you picked up on it, but he was disappointed in the death of the Westerners because it didn't bring him to climax. So I mean that's how sick the dude is.
So that's why he's watching the courtesan getting on with this other dude. On that, right?
Yeah.
It was a fetish thing.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well.
Yeah. This guy's weird. He's got problems.
Yeah. No, he's definitely got problems. Because when he said, we're gonna kill another one in a place, and then he said, "We'll do it in my special way."
Yeah.
When I see a cauldron, I'm like, "Holy cow!"
Yeah.
So I guess you boil people all the time. I'm like, do you eat them too, or are you just gonna take them out? So,
well, I mean, we saw their regard for human life when that one guy got beheaded. You know, just being in the wrong place in the wrong time and speaking up a little too loud.
Yeah, there are a couple characters in the book, and they've set them up well so far in the series that are kind of I would say Clavel putting a face on the excesses of what could be good about Japan. So Yabu is the decadence and obsession with death. Another character you meet just for a minute, and they brought him in much earlier than he comes in the book, is Mariko, the Japanese translator. Her husband named Buntaro, and Buntaro is he's another guy that's going to be interesting as we watch him. So.
Well, I agree with you that one complaint we all have is that there needs to be a narrator. There needs to be someone kind of explaining at least some of this as it goes on, so we can understand context as it unfolds. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's harder to emotionally tie into the characters. You're just trying to figure out who's doing what and why kind of as you go, as opposed to, the general idea is a sound story idea, and, stuff that I love that, we've basically got an heir that needs to come of age, and we've got 5 feudal lords who just, kind of smile in each other's faces, but they'd rather stick a sword down your throat and get along. And what everybody's doing is they're plotting for their window, their shot to seize power and to be the most powerful house or whatever. So that's not a new story, but it's definitely a story that we love, a story I love for sure. So that's going to be interesting. But we need emotional tie-in with the characters to care about how everything's unfolding. And I thought the way they presented the language barrier and the way everybody struggled with it, I thought that was interesting. But the line that jumped out at me, there were 2 lines that jumped out at me. One was at the beginning and one was at the end. The first line was when they discovered the pirate ship and the soldiers went down into the hold and they said, "What are they?" Like they had never seen Europeans. It wasn't "who are they?" It was "what are they?" Like, maybe you'd never seen Europeans or Portuguese, anybody like that. I found that really interesting. And the other line that jumped out at me, which they did explain, which I really, really loved, was at the end where she says, "I have more than one heart."
Yeah.
That was an awesome line. And then they go on to explain it, and they did narrate that. Talking about it, said that a man has 3 hearts. It has the one in your mouth. That's the one that everybody can see. That's the face you present to the world. And then you have your blood pump. That's the one everybody knows about. But then you have a secret third one that you have to keep hidden if you want to survive. I found that ideology incredibly on point. And so what did you guys think about that?
You want to go, Steve, or you want me to go?
You go.
Yeah, the 3 hearts is directly out of the book, and I think that is a Japanese saying, a common Japanese saying. It's interesting though, in that I guess when you read the book, it epitomizes how they have to live their lives, where they have their secret heart that they have to hide from the world, otherwise it leaves them vulnerable. Then their public, it's like their public face, and then there's the different aspects of their personality, and that to actually expose your true agenda, your true feelings about something to someone else is either incredibly foolish or you're incredibly devoted to someone, so which is something that Blackthorn or any Westerner we just don't understand that. That's not our civilization. So
no, I think we understand it. We just do it very, very differently.
That's fair. That's fair.
There are plenty of things built into our culture that's advancing that type of idea. It's just not done that way. For example,
I think a lot of people on social media could do with the secret heart. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, there's a little bit too much of that unfolding. Yeah.
what impact? Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think a lot of it comes to there's a face that you show to power and authority, and that is not necessarily the face that you show, when you're around, your equals or your inferiors. And I think that in Japanese, they basically codified that a lot more. So this is where you see like a certain code of etiquette that they prescribe, and anybody that isn't conformed to it is essentially a barbarian, which is where Blackthorn is, because he doesn't know any of the rules. He doesn't know how to be any of the niceties. He's just not that guy. He's a seaman. He's a sailor. And sailors are really not really great at being cultured. So you get this guy who just doesn't know how to conform, and suddenly he's a savage, and he's othered almost immediately by the Japanese that are there, because this is outside of even what they're used to from the Jesuits.
Well, and I think that, in that small little fishing village, the chances of them ever seeing a Westerner were remote, because Westerners were restricted to Osaka or to, I think it was Kanshu is the one island that they were allowed to be on, and that was it. To go outside of there without permission from the council was a death sentence. So, yeah. But
there was a period where, like, you could not actually be allowed to visit any of the islands at all, really, and like the most that you got were like some of these like artificial island areas that they had set up.
Right. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting is the person who narrated that line and some of the other stuff as they were coming into Osaka was Rodriguez, and they made him much more antagonistic in this first episode of Blackthorn than they did in the book or even the first series, because he's immediately has a kinship to Blackthorn because he saved his life, one, and two, because they're both pilots. And that's a big deal. They didn't really stress that in this first episode, but to be a pilot was like almost being like a mystic, because they knew all the latitudes by heart and it was like a separate training from being a sailor. It was almost like a mystical thing. And I kind of looked it up, and it really was true, especially back then. It was like closely guarded. They wrote their rudders with all their detailed navigational knowledge and code, so nobody could decode it or anything. So it was this crazy brotherhood of pilots. And so, I'm kind of curious what they're doing. Now, I will say that I like this Rodriguez and the way they portrayed him, because in the TV miniseries, it was John Rhys Davies speaking perfect British, as Rodriguez, the Spanish pilot. So,
Now, that's definitely another thing that I wish more context had been given about, as you say, the fellowship of the pilots and the mystique of pilots and what that meant, because that actually explains some more reactions now that you explain it. So we're doing what Jeff would call, we're doing the work of the show.
Right.
So there's a lot that we have to fill in to understand the actions as the show presents them. Another thing that I thought was really, really interesting was how, and I do understand, more of a class system or a caste system or whatever it is that you want to do, but I do find it interesting about how, we claim that we don't have that. The idea that is sold here is that you can go from wherever you are to wherever you want to be. The amount of people that actually do that, and then it also depends on where it is that you're trying to get to, what that means for you. I find very, very interesting, because the vast majority of people that advance to certain levels were born into families that were already there, were born into wealth that helped put them there. And the people that pull themselves up by their bootstraps, as it were, are more the exception than the rule. And then that is not always as it seems, because sometimes people are allowed to gain a platform because, even though this sounds rather crass, because that can help them control the masses more. And so if you put certain people in certain positions of influence, then they know that masses of people are going to follow that example, and many times just leave the aristocracy alone because they're too busy arguing. In our culture, our royalty is celebrities. So we're too busy arguing over celebrities and what they're doing.
Mhm.
And what I find fascinating in my lifetime is that I've seen the values completely shift from when I was little about the aspirations of what you wanted to be when you grow up. And now it seems like we live in a culture that's seeking constant validation. And if you're born into that, I guess you think that's normal, but it's always strange to me that that seems to be the thing. And I was trying to relate to what was their validation. Was it just power? Was it the size of their fiefdom? Was it the favor they had with the ruler? Was it their ability to triumph in hand to hand? Was it, it didn't seem like even though it was a strong situation of honor, it didn't seem like there was a heavy emphasis on finesse. I could be reading it wrong, but it didn't seem like finesse had a high value check. But I couldn't quite put my finger on what gets you respect in this culture. So what do you guys think about that? How would you answer that question? If somebody came in and said, what are the respect pillars in this culture, what would you say that is? Steve,
I would say at the very least, honor and martial ability for sure. Status, because if you're already a samurai, you are automatically accorded a certain amount of respect because of your status. But you keep that and you earn that, by behaving within the rules of their culture, and also, by being really good with a sword and perfecting essentially the craft of that. So a lot of it is this is a warrior culture that has been around for a long time, and this is a time period where all they've known really is war. So I would say it's both of those things, maybe some other things as well, depending on like where you are in life. But I would say those are the two main ones for me.
Yeah, but like failure is equal to death.
Yeah.
Fail.
Constantly, you have to constantly succeed. You have to constantly make sure that you do and say the right things at all times, because the slightest mistake and you've got a knife in your gut, or your head is rolling off your shoulders,
or you have to take it off.
I think it's interesting you say that, because I guess I don't know how much they covered it in the first episode, but they did cover some of it. I think for everybody, no matter who it was, from peasant all the way up to ruler, I think the biggest way to earn status was to pretend at least that you know your place and you know your role and you fulfill that role competently, so no matter what you do. So if you're a fisherman, be the best fisherman that you could be for the village. If you are a courtesan, be the best courtesan you could be, and it was possible to aspire to more, but it's dangerous, and that's where I think where that third heart came in, because if you aspire to more, you're stepping outside the societal bounds, and that's inviting death for you, which then, brings us to the last part, which is, and they do mention this in the first episode, and it's going to be huge in this whole series, is karma. And, accept your karma, and don't, if they died, the child died. It's like, oh, well, he died. That was his karma to die, and to us, that's just like, oh, but we think it is. But what is a common saying that all of us say all the time? It is what it is. Well, what is that other than karma? You're like, oh, something really bad happened, but it is what it is. Well, that's basically us saying karma, so at least how they would understand it. So it's an interesting way of looking at it. But I think the biggest thing, and I still think it is true in Japan today, at least from what I've seen, is that know your role in society, what your society expects of you, and do that. And then if you have aspirations, good luck to you. You know, it's like you can try. I mean, it was possible to go from peasant to samurai. It absolutely was. In fact, they don't cover it, but the Taiko, who is the military dictator who died, started out as a peasant soldier. So
there have been gaijin that have become samurai, Yasuke.
Yeah. So, but to put yourself out there, and is it really that much different in our society to put yourself out there and risk to try and gain is really dangerous and has a lot of a danger to it, you know? So is it really that different here? I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah.
So.
The only thing that now I think about it is loyalty. They put a lot on loyalty. I mean, and especially when you see that one scene where Sonata's talking with that older lord, and he's like, "Yeah, you know, I'm siding with you, and I'm loyal to you, and you know, maybe And the question is, you probably would have done better if you'd sided with the four lords that are trying to kill me."
Yeah.
He said, yeah, there are times when I think about it, but still, he's chosen his course.
Yeah.
He's chosen his course, and he's going to go with it. So,
See, now I got to hold my cards close to my vest because we're going to see some stuff coming up, but like I said before, the whole story takes place. Toranaga betrayed his lord. So it's like they valued loyalty right up until the point where they didn't value loyalty. So
there's that. But then you also have the cases of like the 47 Ronin who, basically were so devoted to their lord that was betrayed by the emperor that, they went in and did something they knew they'd be killed for. And that is highly respected in Japan.
Okay, well, two things. The first thing Nims, you talked about how do we do anything different over here? Well, the way we do it here is based on the fact that America is a British offshoot, even though people don't like to understand that. And then a lot of our ideologies come from the Greeks. But basically the way we do it here is we cover the real fight with a so-called justice fight. But we don't fight for justice, we fight for privilege. And all the fights in this culture are based on privilege, they're not based on justice. And everybody that's, however you define yourself, because I actually said this at the Comic-Con I was at a couple of weeks ago, whenever people are complaining about a certain group, they're not saying what the group did was wrong, they're saying, give me my turn. And that really made a lot of people mad when I said that, but that's basically how we do it here. You slather a little justice butter on it to make it taste better in your mouth, but it's a privilege fight. You're saying that this group of people, whoever they are, get to do this, and we don't, and that is not fair. And so then however you make that play out, it's a privilege fight. It's not a justice fight because we've never had a system of justice.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that because especially to the people in this time period or in this story in particular, if you mentioned that you needed to do something because of justice, they wouldn't even know what you're talking about. It would be a laughable concept because the only justice is who is standing and who is lying on the floor with their head separated from their shoulders. That's justice. Yeah. So,
And the other thing I wanted to remark on, and I've told this story often, I wanted to echo your point about being the best you could be. That really resonates. I've seen that with many Far Eastern Asian cultures. I've seen that with Southern Koreans. I've seen it with Japanese. I've seen it with Chinese. And one example I'll never forget, and it's about not shaming the family, and it's about being the best you can be. So I was at a piano recital with some of my students many, many years ago, and I'll never forget that a father was there, and he had his son and his daughter, and I believe they were Japanese, and so both of them had to go up to play a recital piece. And if you've ever played in a recital, it's one of the most nerve-wracking, intense, potentially self-esteem destroying experiences you could ever have in your young life. And there were a lot of people I had to talk back onto playing the piano because of messing up in a recital. That's how deep it is. Anyway, his son went up first, and his son killed it. He just killed it. He just do. This boy's like 8 years old. Do, and everybody clapped and blah blah blah. When he sat down, he put his arms around his son, and his body language was, that's my boy. That's my boy right there. And you can see him hugging him and, doing that thing that fathers do, that shoulder rub, that kind of thing. So his daughter, which looked to be about 10 or 11 maybe, because these weren't my students, they were just there. She went up and she played for a while, but then she froze and she lost her way and she really kind of messed up and she forgot the piece, because everybody that plays knows sometimes you can, if you don't know your piece backwards and forwards, and sometimes even if you do, you can forget entire sections. You can be playing just fine, and then you hit this thing and it's like, well, what am I doing? So she froze. When she sat down, I'll never forget. He didn't touch her. He didn't comfort her. He didn't pull her. He didn't say, that's okay, baby, we'll get it next time. He didn't touch her at all. And I could see from behind her, I could see her shame. I could see her like, oh, Lord, I've embarrassed the family. I've embarrassed my father. And that really jumped out to me because it was so prominent and so understood between the three of them. Like, you got to be the best. You got to be the best. If you're not the best, then there's no comfort for you. And so when you say that in terms of a value system, that really resonated with me as well, because, that kind of know your role and be good at your role. And because what we do in this country and what we've done, at least in my lifetime, is challenge almost every status quo. You don't get to really challenge the powers that be status quo because it's set up for you not to be able to challenge it. But what they'll do is they'll let you challenge every other status quo to keep everybody else fighting. So, the powers that be aren't challenged. But that seems to be what we value, is redefining everything. Why does this have to be this? Why can't this be that? Why can't this be that, or whatever? So that's what I've noticed in my lifetime. But it's, if you're the best you can be, great, we'll give you a gold medal. But if you're a slacker, you can have a TV show about being a slacker. So I find that fascinating too.
Absolutely. It's interesting because, like I said, we're going to see over the course of this series how everything taken to the ultimate extreme in this culture, or it can be bad, but how taking the things and not fulfilling them is also bad. So we're going to see that, and we already saw a little bit of this first episode where, they urge Blackthorn to bathe, and he's like, again, so it's like, well, bathe more than once a year. Are you insane? Versus
it's kind of like Bjorn from our D&D game. He can't be bathed.
Yeah. And what's the saying that we say now? Cleanliness is next to godliness, but I don't think Western civilization has not lived that, versus, in the East, it was necessary for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is they were overpopulated back then. So,
So the last thing I'll say, so we can wrap up, is, and this might sound strange, but you guys might get it. If you want to know what this reminded me of the most in terms of other shows, it was actually Logan's Run.
Yeah.
This felt like
we did cover that on Cinemas, so yeah, I get it.
Yeah, this felt very much to me like you must conform to the societal rules or you have to die. So if we say you live to 30 and you go to carousel, whether or not you can live further, whether or not your crystal is clear or pulsing or whatever, if we say life ends at 30 and you have to ascend or carousel, then that's just the way it goes. And if you choose to be a runner, we will hunt you down and take you out because you can't do that.
Now, that is such an interesting observation. I would have never put those two together, but you're right. That's really interesting. So,
and that's what this reminded me of the most. And it was definitely crystallized for me when you said know your role and do it well. But it's like everybody has their slot, their place, their role, however you want to say it. And everybody in this context is saying, you are that. You're a barbarian, you're a courtesan, you're an heir, you're a soul. You are that, and you must be that. And if you don't be that, we'll kill you.
I think another science fiction story I would kind of lump it in with would be Brave New World. And the concept is you are who you are, and there's no use questioning it. Just accept it. You know, if you're a gamma, be a gamma. You know, so
It's like Divergent as well, because all of that is basically about you're in one of these houses based on these arbitrary results, and you can't step outside of this role that society's placed you in.
I was going to say, it's funny you were going to say what this reminded you. This first episode reminded me of Denis Villeneuve's first Dune movie, which was it's very slow. If you don't know the material, you're going to be lost and confused. And it's like, and there's a bunch of people you're introduced and concepts you're introduced to, and they're never really explained to you. So if you don't know about it going in, good luck, so, which is unfortunate, I think. So,
well, in Tom Cruise,
based on a book.
Yeah.
In Tom Cruise's The Last Samurai, we see that the introduction of guns and rifles and that type of armament put an end to the feudal Japan period in a way that they didn't agree with, but they couldn't really resist. But what I find fascinating is how it's the oxymoron of, it's like the Amazons, it's like peace through strength. Like, we don't like all this war and we don't like all this fighting. We don't like all this division, but we got to do it. We got to fight because if we don't fight, then the warring houses are going to take us out anyway. So we don't like it, and peace is, tenuous, and it's like a spider web, but we're not going to lay down our swords and get along.
Yeah. It's interesting because that movie is really you could almost, the events in that movie anyway are the bookend to what happens in this series. So, by the end of this series, we'll enter a shogunate. Someone will be the shogun, and Western powers will mostly be cut off from Japan until the Meiji Restoration, and the emperor was Meiji in The Last Samurai. So until that point, that whole period of time, the West was cut out of Japan. So,
and that pretty much ended the samurai as a class.
Oh yeah. So it's a very interesting history, and I love studying Japan, and I think it's fascinating what they did. And it's one of those what if things where I'm like, well, what if they had opened themselves up to the West and allowed themselves to bring in Western technology and stuff and advance alongside the West in that way? But I think it was just too foreign to their culture and would have upended their society like they were upended in the 1800s. So
it took them a long time, and it also took them losing World War II, and then like decades of just being surrounded essentially by the West and having to adapt that made them more modern. And even then, there are very Japanese things about them still.
Yeah, but the thing is that Japan still has that spirit that you could see even in this story, but through history that I know that I think it's a common saying where Japan takes everything from around the world, makes it its own, and makes it better. They did it with like Kobe beef, or they try and do it with alcohol and
cars,
culinary and cars and everything. It's like, we may not be the best now, but we're going to take it, make it our own, and be the best at it.
And they're doing it with pop culture too, like manga and anime and all that. Yeah. So they're still doing it.
No, when I was there, we had a group that sang, that was a gospel choir, and if you had closed your eyes, you wouldn't have known it was Japanese people because they didn't speak English. They were singing phonetically. But the sound was so accurate to Black American gospel music. We were all like, what the world? It was amazing. And also I found there was a huge difference in older Japanese and younger Japanese in terms of attitudes. Because the younger Japanese were still held on to all the values we've been talking about, the younger people were a lot more open. But they always, how can I say it? How can I say this? When I was there, when we were there, I really wanted to eat their diet, but they kept feeding us American food, which I thought was really funny. Because they were like, well, this is what you guys eat, right? And I was like, but we want to try some of your cuisine. And it was a lot of what they ate was raw fish and vegetables. And then they walk and bike ride everywhere because there's too many of them to have cars like we do. And they have convex mirrors in the alleys because they don't have enough room for the cars to fit through. So you have to let people pass. And then a lot of the schools were on top of the hill. So a lot of people had really strong leg and thigh muscles. And it was just a lot of little differences. And there's very few open spaces. It's crowded almost everywhere you go. And so I found all those contrasts very, very interesting, but they're so very polite. So very polite.
I will say that, it's been a lifetime of me loving Japanese things and studying it, but I would say that for as much as I think that I know, I don't think that I could ever really, even if I lived there, could really ever understand Japan. I know a few people who live there now, but it's like, it's just one of those things. It's I think it's a culture that is I respect a lot, but without growing up in it, I don't know that I would understand every aspect of it. So I think it's fascinating though. So
ditto. I again, when you have a more homogenous group of people, and when you have a we mindset, we're all in it together. Here, it's basically tribalism, your tribe, your faction, your whatever you believe in. You draw a line and say, this is right, and there's something wrong with the rest of the world. And round and round we go. That's what Twitter's for, for you to find your online tribe and talk about how everybody else don't know what they're talking about. But anyway.
Now that's a whole other conversation. I think we could tie it into this first episode before we go out. But this concept of a homogeneous society, that is not in vogue nowadays. Multiculturalism is a thing, but Japan doesn't believe that either. They welcome gaijin, but you're a gaijin. So it's like, well, what does that mean? They're once again the West and the West values are pushing up against the East and Japan, and other countries. So it's the more things change, the more they stay the same type thing. Yeah. So,
unfortunately, what we substitute for definitions in our culture is actually buzzwords and talking points. You don't know these things are defined. That's why when you do those videos and you ask people on the street, what does this mean? What does that mean? They don't really know. So what we have is buzzwords and talking points, because when you say multiculturalism, do you mean one main culture and every group has to assimilate into it? And you just have a lot of different people?
I mean, like, if you live in Germany and you're that's not a great example. The mainstream Germans, for the most part, Germany's not homogeneous, but Sweden is a better example. If you live in Sweden, most Swedes have a common language, a common history, a common experience of upbringing, the same folk tales, the same aspirations. It's that zeitgeist, for lack, to use a buzzword, of everybody kind of is coming from the same place. And so no one has to tell you that all of you kind of belong together. It would be like growing up in a village somewhere. It's like, if all of you grew up in a village, no one has to tell you that you're from that village. You just know, hey, all of us are the same because we all have these same experiences and stuff. Now, I don't think that the United States has been like that maybe ever, but for a long time, that's just not who we are, but I think when I say multiculturalism, what I mean is that now it's celebrated to be different, which I don't think is bad, but it's like, not only do you need to celebrate the differences, we need to find things that tie us together. Otherwise, we just become those tribes that you're talking about, so.
Well, I just had a panel when I was at Capricorn where we talked about this, and we talked about archetypes. Our archetypes are still very European. They just put people of different ethnic groups in the slots now and say that's diversity and inclusion. Because I've studied like different pantheons of gods for different African countries, and most people here still don't understand that Africa is a continent, and people, because you don't have the luxury of individual socialization. If you are of African descent here, you're Black. But Kenyans are not the same as Ghanans, are not the same as Zimbabweans, are not the same as people on the Ivory Coast, are not the same as Egyptians. They don't think that way. We think that way.
And for all of you who don't know, that is playing out in Ghana right now. And if you don't know, go read about it, because Ghana is one of those countries that's butting up against Western values. So,
Right. So I find all that interesting. And like I said, as I study people, it seems that it's the same idea. It's just expressed in whatever ways particular to that culture and that time. But people are just as adamant about it, whatever it is, which I've lived long enough now for that to amaze me, because 5 minutes from now, everybody's going to change their mind, and then they're going to swear that new thing is the right thing.
Yeah. So, I don't remember who it was, and I'll just say this real quick, then we can get out of here. But there was one person that said, there was like a philosopher that said, one of the most important things that could tie a country together, and if you don't have that, you got to grasp onto something else, is language. So if a country or a group of people that live together don't speak the same language, then you're starting off on the back foot right away.
Language is is very much definitive of identity. Yeah, they've done studies on that.
Yeah, and I will say that in this country, we can't even agree on that at this point. So living in California, I can tell you we definitely can't agree on that. So
starting off on the back foot. That sounds like the title to something. All right, guys, I want to thank you for this pod. This is very interesting, great discussion. I'm very interested to see how the series unfolds and to follow the characters we got introduced to, and very interested how the filters that we see it through, I think, is really, really powerful. So I'm looking forward to doing the next episode. So thank you, Nims.
Absolutely. This was great. Love talking about it. Very good discussion.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, this was a good episode, and I think we really got into like a lot of the deep cultural things that we generally don't dive into on this show. And I will also add, it is nice also to discuss a show that we don't hate, because we've been doing a lot of that.
Yeah, we have to work a little bit harder nowadays to find one of those. But all right, thanks to everybody that's watching our broadcast. Don't forget to check out the Sloppy Spoilers Network and United Capes Podcast Network, because we literally have something for everybody. We got up-and-coming artists, we got established artists, we got voice actors, we got stage actors, we've got comic book makers, we've got retro movies. So you can find some content that you love with UCPN and Comic Crusaders. And me and this crew will see you next time on the next episode of Sloppy Spoilers. We're out.